The gate hung crooked on one hinge, scraping the dirt with every gust of wind. Caleb Whitlow reined in his horse at the edge of the yard and stared down what used to be his family's front porch, now sagging like a drunkard's spine. The screen door flapped loose in the breeze. The roof above it was sun-bleached, brittle. The ranch hadn't just been neglected, it had been abandoned by everything but ghosts and weeds. He swung down from the saddle, his boots hitting dry earth with a muted thud. The sun had dipped low behind the Montana ridge, and shadows were pooling thick in the corners of the barn and house alike. It had been 6 years since he set foot on this land, and only 3 days since he buried his mother on a wind-swept hill behind the old church. His brother hadn't come back. Caleb had stood alone at the grave. As he led the horse toward the post, something shifted, a flash of movement at the barn door. Quick, low, human. He froze. The barn door was cracked just enough for light to spill inside. Caleb reached instinctively for the rifle slung across the saddle. His fingers tightened around the stock. "Who's in there?" His voice carried across the yard, low and even, but firm as dried oak. "This is private land." Silence. The wind rustled dry grass. A creak from inside the barn. He took 2 steps forward, rifle raised just below his shoulder. His boots crunched gravel with the slow certainty of a man who'd seen enough ambushes to know where not to stand. The barn still smelled of hay and horses long gone. As he pushed the door open with the barrel, the hinges groaned. He stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dim. That's when he saw her. A young woman stood in the far stall, half-shadowed, pressed against the wooden slats like she might vanish into them if she held still enough. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained with dust. Dirt smudged her cheek. In her arms she held a small child, a girl with tangled hair and eyes far too wide for her age. The woman didn't scream, didn't beg, just stared at him like a deer cornered, chest rising and falling like she expected the world to come crashing down any second. "Please," she said. Her voice was cracked from thirst or fear, maybe both. "We just needed somewhere to rest. We didn't touch anything. We're not here to steal." Caleb's rifle dropped a few inches, unthinking. The child had her arms tight around the woman's neck, her little face half hidden but unmistakably terrified. He should have demanded answers, names, reasons. Instead, what came out was quiet. "You're safe now." The words surprised even him, but they felt right, like they'd been waiting in his chest for someone to say them to. The woman didn't move, but something in her shoulders softened, barely. She held the girl tighter and stepped forward into a thin shaft of dying light. "My name is Nora," she said. "This is my daughter, Maisie." Caleb Whitlow. He lowered the rifle completely. "This was my family's place." Nora looked around, eyes scanning the rot and ruin. "We thought it was empty." "It almost is," he said. She nodded, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Caleb took one slow step back. "You both look like you haven't eaten in a while." Nora hesitated, then whispered, "We haven't." "Well," he said, hitching the rifle back over his shoulder, "I've still got a stove that works and enough beans to feed an army. Or a pair of runaways. We won't stay long." "You'll stay as long as you need." The house groaned when he pushed open the door. Dust spiraled in the evening light, catching in old cobwebs along the rafters. Caleb hadn't planned on company. He hadn't planned on anything except sorting through what was left of the family ranch and figuring out what to do with a life he'd put on hold for 6 years too long. The girl, Maisie, clung to her mother's side like a shadow. Her dress was too thin, too short, Her shoes looked like they'd walked more miles than her little legs should have carried. While water boiled on the stove, Caleb diced jerky into a dented pot and added beans, garlic, and a pinch of salt. He didn't speak much, didn't ask questions, just worked. Nora sat at the table, eyes flicking to every corner like she still half expected someone to drag her back into the dark. Caleb caught her watching him once or twice, not suspicious, just tired, hollow tired. "You lived here?" she asked after a while. "Was born here," he said. "Left for the war in '84. Came back to bury my mother." Nora looked down. "I'm sorry." Caleb stirred the pot, the rhythm familiar. "This place was supposed to be hers and my brother's, but he took off after the war. She wrote me, said the land was failing. I figured I owed it a proper goodbye." The girls sneezed quietly. Nora pulled her close, wrapping the child's small body in her shawl. They ate in near silence. Caleb hadn't shared a meal with anyone since before the fighting. The sound of a child's spoon tapping a tin bowl echoed like music in the empty house. Afterward, he showed them to the guest room. The sheets were old but clean, the mattress still soft. Nora touched the quilt like it was a crown jewel. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know." She looked at him, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but something else too, something like disbelief. "Thank you." That night, Caleb lay on the couch in the front room, listening to the wind sweep across the porch. Outside, the mountains watched like silent sentinels. The house still smelled of dust and wood smoke, but it didn't feel empty anymore. He came back expecting ghosts. Instead, he'd found a woman with dirt on her face and a child who didn't know how to smile. And somehow, he wasn't scared of that at all. The sun rose slow and golden, spilling across the cracked floorboards of the Whitlow ranch house like it hadn't done in years. The wind had calmed some time before dawn, and now the prairie was quiet, save for the low cluck of hens and the distant creak of an old windmill that still turned when it pleased. Caleb stirred on the couch, his back stiff, the blanket twisted around his legs. For a moment, he didn't move, just listened. The sounds were different, lighter, less hollow. There was life in the house again, however small. Then he smelled biscuits. He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The kitchen was faintly lit, the wood stove humming with warmth. Nora stood barefoot at the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, working dough on the flour-dusted table. Her hair was pinned up with more determination than grace, and her hands moved with practiced rhythm. Maisie sat on a stool nearby, swinging her feet and munching on a slice of apple, humming something tuneless under her breath. "You're up early," Caleb said, voice thick with sleep. Nora looked over her shoulder. "Figured I should earn my keep." "You don't owe me anything." "I know." She offered a small smile. "But it feels better to help." Caleb crossed the room slowly, nodding toward the counter. "You cook often?" "Used to." She dropped the biscuits onto a baking sheet and slid it into the stove. "Back when? Before?" Maisie tilted her head. "We used to make cinnamon bread on Sundays, but Mama says flour is precious now." Caleb chuckled. "Well, I ain't had cinnamon bread since I was 10, so we'll call that even." They ate warm biscuits and boiled eggs from the hen house, with a dab of blackberry jam that had somehow survived in the root cellar. It was the first real meal Caleb had shared in what felt like years. There wasn't much talking, just chewing and the occasional thump of Maisie's heel against the leg of her stool. After breakfast, Nora offered to sweep the porch while Maisie collected eggs. Caleb saddled up to check the southern fence line, which had fallen into disgraceful shape since spring. He paused on the porch, watching as Nora leaned into her broom, gathering dust and dead leaves into neat piles. She looked up at him. "We'll stay out of your way." "You're not in the way." She didn't reply, but her eyes lingered on his a moment longer than they needed to. The day unfolded in quiet labor. Caleb patched fence rails and dug out a rusted hinge on the old gate. He found a half-full barrel of nails his father must have forgotten behind the tool shed. Nora pulled weeds from around the house and cleared a path to the pump. Maisie followed them both, bouncing between tasks, narrating everything like she was keeping a record in her head. At mid-afternoon, Caleb took a break beneath the old walnut tree, wiping sweat from his neck with a handkerchief. Nora came around the side of the house, a tin cup in her hand. "Water," she said, handing it over. "Bless you." She sat down beside him in the grass, not close, but not far. Maisie chased a chicken across the yard, arms flailing like a scarecrow come to life. "She's doing better," Nora said. "She wasn't always like this. She used to be louder, brighter, before we left Cheyenne." Caleb sipped. "What happened there?" Nora hesitated. "My husband was a preacher, not a fire and brimstone type, more a gentle sort. He got involved helping the coal workers organize. Said it was wrong how they were treated. The company didn't like it. He disappeared after a Sunday service. His body turned up 3 days later outside town." Caleb said nothing, just looked out across the prairie. The air felt heavier, somehow. "I tried to stay," she went on. "Worked at a laundry. But the man who ran the place, he got persistent. So we left. Walked most the way." He turned to her. "You walked from Cheyenne?" "We hitched some. Mostly walked." Maisie came running, arms full of wildflowers. "Mama, look! I found pink ones." Nora took the bundle and kissed her daughter's forehead. "They're beautiful." Maisie turned to Caleb. "Do you like flowers?" "I do now." The girl beamed and scampered off. "That man in Cheyenne," Caleb said after a pause. "He's still bothering you?" "Not anymore. We made sure of that." Something in her tone stopped further questions. Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't need the details. He could see it plain on her face, what she'd been through, what she'd fought to protect. The kind of courage that wasn't loud but burned steady. By late afternoon, the porch was clean, the yard no longer looked abandoned, and the fence in back stood upright for the first time in years. Caleb cooked beans and salted pork. Nora baked cornbread. Maisie set the table with 3 mismatched plates she found in the cupboard. They ate by lamplight. Outside, a breeze rattled the loose shutter, but inside it was warm. After dinner, Nora lingered at the sink, rinsing dishes while Caleb dried. Maisie had already fallen asleep on a pile of quilts in the corner. "She doesn't ask about her father anymore," Nora said softly. "She stopped last spring." Caleb looked at her, unsure what to say. "She still remembers him," she added, "but not clearly." He placed a plate on the shelf. "It's hard, losing someone like that." Nora glanced over. "Did you lose someone?" "My father, years ago, and my mother, just last week." "Were they kind to you?" He paused. "Not always. My mother tried. My father was hard, believed in work and silence, said both could make a man." Nora turned off the water. The silence stretched. "I think some people don't know how to love," she said. "Maybe." He folded the towel. "But some people do." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Unspoken, unfinished. That night, after the lamp had been blown out and the house had settled into its nighttime hush, Caleb sat on the edge of the porch, looking out toward the barn. The stars were out, bold and sharp. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. Nora stood in the doorway, a blanket around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Me either." She joined him on the top step. For a while, they just sat, listening to the crickets. "I don't know what we're doing here," she said finally, "but it's the first time I haven't felt scared in a long time." "You're safe now," Caleb said, repeating the words he'd spoken in the barn. "I meant it then. I still do." She looked at him, not smiling, not crying, just there, real and still. "Then maybe we'll stay," she whispered. And for the first time in months, Caleb felt the ache in his chest ease just a little, like maybe something broken had begun to mend. The morning came with a hush, the kind that settles over land before it remembers how to be busy again. A light fog clung low across the prairie, thin as gauze, softening the edges of everything. Caleb woke early, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see how the day began with someone else breathing under the same roof. He stepped outside with a cup of coffee, boots half-laced, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The porch boards creaked like they always had. Chickens rustled in the coop. Maisie's rooster gave its best broken crow, and for the first time in a long while, the place didn't feel forgotten. He sipped quietly, watching the sky lighten. Inside, he could hear soft footsteps, Nora's, and the faint clatter of dishes being moved. By the time the sun broke over the ridge, the ranch was stirring. Nora had made oatcakes and fried the last of the salt pork. Caleb fixed a broken stool in the kitchen while Maisie drew crooked horses on the back of an old ledger page. After breakfast, Nora took Maisie to the garden plot to plant the seeds she'd found in a jar in the pantry. Beans, mostly, a few hopeful pumpkin starts. Caleb saddled the horse and rode the north fence, clearing fallen limbs and checking for tracks. The air was cool, the ground still damp from rain 2 nights past. As he rode back in the afternoon, he saw a figure walking up the path from the road. A man, stooped, his frame wiry but familiar. Caleb slowed his horse, eyes narrowing against the sun. "Hank?" he called. The man raised a hand. "Figured I'd find you out here." It was Hank Barlow, the neighbor from down the ridge. He wore his usual felt hat, patched vest, and boots that looked older than most of the trees on the property. Caleb dismounted and met him halfway. "Didn't expect company. Didn't plan on being any," Hank said, patting his chest pocket. "But your ma left something with me a while back. Said to give it to you if you ever came home proper." He pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax long gone brittle. Caleb took it slowly. "She never mentioned it." "She didn't mention a lot near the end," Hank said. "But she meant for you to have that." Nora stepped onto the porch, Maisie close behind. Caleb glanced back, gave a small nod to let her know all was well. "New faces?" Hank asked. Caleb didn't answer at first. "They're staying a while." Hank squinted toward the porch, then looked back at Caleb with a faint smirk. "Good. This place needs voices again." After Hank left, Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, the envelope still in hand. The paper was soft at the creases. He opened it carefully, the handwriting unmistakably his mother's, neat, slanted, just the way she used to label pantry jars. "Caleb, if you're reading this, then you've come home. I don't know what kind of man the world has turned you into, but I pray it's one who still listens to the wind and remembers how the trees sounded in summer. This land isn't much. It's tired, but it's still here, like you. And maybe that's enough. I don't expect you to stay, but if you do, don't do it for me. Do it for what you might find here, something quiet, something real. Love, your mother." He read the letter twice, then folded it and slipped it into his shirt pocket. That evening, while Nora hung laundry on the line and Maisie ran in circles chasing her own shadow, Caleb repaired the hinge on the barn door. His hands moved out of habit, but his mind wasn't on the tools. He thought about his mother, about the years they lost, about the fact she'd waited for him even when she knew he might not come, and about the woman now folding sheets in the golden light, the one who hadn't asked for anything but gave gentleness without even noticing it. Later, when the sun dipped behind the hill and painted the sky in streaks of peach and smoke, Nora brought out a tin plate and sat beside him on the porch steps. "You were quiet today," she said. He nodded. "Got a letter from my mother. Old. Before she passed, she left it with Hank, told him to give it to me if I ever came home." Nora pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What did it say?" "That this place isn't much, but it's still here. And maybe that's enough." She looked at him, eyes thoughtful. "Is it?" He didn't answer right away. "It's more than I expected." Maisie ran up then, holding a feather she'd found near the coop. "Mama, look!" Nora brushed Maisie's hair back from her face. "It's lovely. Maybe we'll keep it in a jar." Maisie turned to Caleb. "You want it?" He blinked. "You giving it away?" "I got more." He took it carefully, like it might fall apart in his hands. "Then, thank you." That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch again, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind tick at the shutters. Something had shifted, not outside, but in him. He rose quietly and stepped onto the porch. The moon was high, full and bright. The garden rows were barely visible in the silver light, but they were there. Real. Nora's voice came from the doorway behind him, soft. "You all right?" He didn't turn. "Yeah." She stepped up beside him, blanket wrapped tight around her. "That letter, it said to stay?" "It said not to stay for her." He looked at her then. "But maybe for something else." Nora studied his face, unreadable. "What about you?" he asked. "You think this could be something?" She looked out across the land. "I think it already is. We're just not brave enough to say it yet." He smiled, just barely. "Caleb," she said, after a moment, "if you asked me to stay, I wouldn't say no." His hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. Inside, Maisie stirred in her sleep, murmuring about the rooster and beans and someone named Captain Pickle. Outside, under the wide Montana moon, Caleb exhaled like a man finally learning how to breathe again. The storm came fast. Clouds rolled in from the north like bruises across the sky, and the wind turned sharp, carrying the scent of rain and distant lightning. Caleb was in the south field, mending a bent fence post when the first crack split overhead. He dropped his tools and looked up. The air changed in that instant, all stillness and charge, the kind of hush that meant trouble. He ran. By the time he reached the house, Nora was already outside gathering the laundry from the line, her skirts whipping around her legs, hair loose and wild. Maisie stood on the porch with a worried look, clutching her raggedy stuffed cat. "Storm's gonna break hard," Caleb said, grabbing clothespins and helping Nora wrestle the sheets into the basket. "We felt it coming," she said over the wind. Maisie's ears started popping. "I'll take the barn," he said. "You two get inside." "No," Nora called after him. "I'm coming too." The next hour passed in a blur of rain and thunder and hurried movement. Caleb and Nora managed to secure the barn doors, throw tarps over the hay pile, and herd the goats into the smaller pen. The storm cracked open above them with a roar, and for a moment the whole world went white with lightning. They ducked inside the barn, soaked to the skin, panting. "You always run headfirst into lightning?" she asked, wiping wet hair from her eyes. "Only when I've got something worth protecting." That quieted her. Back at the house, Maisie had curled under a quilt by the hearth, the stuffed cat tucked beneath her chin. The storm had her nerves high, but the fire helped. So did the gentle rhythm of Nora's voice, as she read from a book they'd found tucked behind an old flour sack. Caleb stood in the doorway for a while, watching them. The lamplight painted their faces gold. Nora's voice, even and sure, calmed more than just the little girl beside her. He joined them once the wind settled to a steady drum against the shutters. The fire hissed when a stray drop hit the stone. When Maisie finally nodded off, Nora set the book aside and covered her with the edge of the quilt. She sat back slowly, her hands resting on her lap. Quiet. "She's tough," Caleb said. "She doesn't know any other way to be." The fire cracked. Rain softened outside. Nora looked over at him, her expression unreadable. "We should go," she said. He blinked. "What? I mean, not now. But soon. We've stayed longer than we meant to. We didn't plan to—" She stopped, sighing. "You've been kind. We don't want to overstay our welcome." "You haven't," he said, sitting forward. "Oh, you haven't even come close. It's just not fair to you. This was your home. You came back here to make sense of it, not to be interrupted by strangers who—" "You're not strangers anymore," he said. She didn't look at him. "Still, we were never part of your plan." "I didn't have a plan," he said. "Not really." "Exactly." He stood up, walked to the window, watched the rain trail down the glass like threads unraveling. "You don't owe me reasons, Nora. But I need to say this." She waited. "When I came back here, I thought it was just to bury the past. Close up shop. Sell the land, maybe. I figured this place died with my mother." He turned back to her. "But then I saw you in that barn, and something shifted." Nora's eyes lifted to meet his. "You didn't break anything by walking in here," he said. "You gave me a reason to fix what was already falling apart." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. "I don't want you to go." Nora looked at the sleeping child, then back at him. "I can't promise anything, Caleb." "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "I'm asking you to stay." There was a long pause between them, the kind that stretches not because of uncertainty, but because it holds something too big to say all at once. "I'm tired," she whispered, "of running, of looking over my shoulder, of pretending like we're not still hurting." "Then stop," he said gently. "Let this be the place where you stop." She nodded once, barely. That night, Caleb didn't sleep on the couch. He rolled out a bedroll near the hearth, close enough to hear Maisie's small breaths and feel the warmth of the fire. In the morning, the storm had passed. The yard was soaked, but the fences held. The barn stood solid. The garden had taken a beating, but Nora was already outside assessing what could be salvaged. "Some of the seedlings might make it," she said. "Beans are tougher than they look. So are you?" She smiled faintly. Maisie came skipping out of the house in oversized boots and holding a tin mug full of chicken feed. "I'm naming the rooster Pickle," she announced. Caleb blinked. "Why?" "Because it pecks like pickles taste, sour and quick." He laughed, a sound that surprised them all. That afternoon, Caleb and Nora worked side by side, repairing the damaged rows, pulling weeds, shaking off debris. Maisie helped gather the salvageable stalks and sorted them into piles, humming a song that had no tune. As they worked, Caleb felt something he hadn't in years, a rhythm, a shared purpose. He looked over at Nora, sweat on her brow, hands deep in soil, and felt a steadiness rise in his chest. Later that evening, Nora poured warm water into a basin and gently washed Maisie's feet while the girl told her stories about imaginary goats and invisible fences. Caleb watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet contentment settling into his bones. She looked up at him once, her face soft. "You sure?" she asked. "I've never been more." She nodded. "All right then." The next day, Caleb dug a post hole near the back edge of the pasture. Just one, not for a fence, but for something else entirely. A marker, a place to build something that would last. And nearby, under the shade of the tall oak tree, Nora sat stitching a new patch into Maisie's dress, the fabric catching the breeze like a sail finding wind again. The oak tree stood at the edge of the south pasture, tall and solid, its bark twisted like old rope. Caleb had spent most of the morning trimming back its lower branches, sweeping away the dry needles and leaves until the ground beneath was smooth and clean. He stepped back, hands on his hips, and looked up at it like a man measuring more than just shade. Behind him, Nora approached with a basket of washed linens on her hip and a piece of twine looped around her wrist. "You're clearing it for something," she said, half a smile in her voice. He nodded. Thought this might be a good place. For what? For saying something that should have been said a long time ago. Nora set the basket down. "Well, go on then." He turned to face her, wiping his hands on the back of his jeans. "I've been thinking about the shape of things," he said. "This land, this house, you and Maisie, what's here now feels right." She studied his face, not blinking. "I don't just want you to stay," he said. "I want to build something with you. For real. No half-promises, no waiting for someone else to come fix things." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. Inside was his mother's wedding ring, the gold dulled by time but still whole. "I want to marry you, Nora." For a long moment, the world didn't move. Nora looked at the ring, then back up at him. Her eyes weren't wide with surprise. They were calm. "Ready." "You're sure?" "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean." She smiled, slow and steady, the kind that built from the heart up. "Then I guess we better find someone who knows how to say the words." They told Maisie that evening. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, holding a carved wooden spoon like a scepter. "Does that mean we get to keep the rooster forever?" she asked. "It means we're a family," Nora said, brushing Maisie's hair with her fingers. Maisie grinned, missing a front tooth. "Okay, but I want to be flower girl, and the rooster comes too." The next morning, Caleb rode into town while the sun was still climbing over the hills. The trail into Dub Boyce was quiet, and the scent of pine hung heavy on the air. He passed no wagons, no riders, just the wind and his thoughts. He found Reverend Albie Hobbs at the general store, inspecting a crate of dried apples with a suspicious eye. "You still ride the circuit?" Caleb asked. The preacher looked up, his beard dusted with flour. "Only if the horse holds up." "I need vows read," Caleb said. "This Sunday, under an oak tree." Albie squinted. "Didn't take you for the ceremonial type." "Some things deserve the wait," Caleb said. The preacher nodded. "Then I'll be there." Before heading home, Caleb bought a spool of muslin, a small tin of horehound drops for Maisie, and a new hinge for the chicken coop. He rode back slow, the late light warming his back, the weight in his chest not heaviness, but something like purpose. Back at the ranch, Nora was in the yard, showing Maisie how to loop twine between two fence posts. Her hair had come loose in the breeze, and she squinted up when she saw Caleb approach. He didn't say anything. He just held up the muslin. She smiled. That night, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, working in companionable silence. Caleb polished the boots he'd worn to enlist, rubbing at the scuffs like they held old ghosts. Nora cut the muslin into panels, her fingers steady, her face bent in focus. "Do you know what kind of wedding you want?" she asked, without looking up. "I want one with you in it," he said. She paused, then resumed cutting. "There's a tree," she said, "just past the pasture. Could we stand there?" "I cleared the ground this morning." She met his eyes. "You knew I'd say yes." "No," he said. but I hoped. Do you want anyone else there? No one who'd matter more than the two already under this roof. She smiled. Then just us. That's enough. The next day, they worked like folks preparing for a harvest. Nora hung calico strips between two branches above the tree. Maisie picked wildflowers, prairie smoke and asters, and arranged them in a tin cup. Caleb dragged over 2 benches from the shed, dusted them off, and spread clean feed sacks across the seats like cushions. That evening, Nora stitched her dress by lamplight. It was simple, no lace or ruffles, stitched high at the neck and tied at the waist with a band made from the same muslin Caleb had carried home. She looked up at him once, needle paused mid-air. "Your mother wore white." "She wore blue," he said. "Said white was for women who hadn't worked a day in their lives." Nora smiled. Then I picked right. On Sunday morning, the preacher arrived just after dawn. His horse was lathered and he smelled like dust and saddle oil. He didn't ask many questions, just wiped his brow and waited beneath the tree. Nora stepped out of the house, Maisie beside her, holding a ribbon with the ring tied on it. The child walked carefully, lips pressed tight in concentration. Nora's dress caught in the wind, and her hair, braided down her back, shimmered in the morning light. Caleb met her halfway. They stood beneath the oak, hands joined. The preacher's voice was low and sure. The words were simple, sacred in their simplicity. "I will," Caleb said. "I will," Nora echoed. The ring slid onto her finger like it had been waiting there all along. When the vows were done, the preacher nodded, tipped his hat, and turned away without ceremony. Caleb reached out and pressed a kiss to Nora's forehead, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. They didn't celebrate loud. There was no dancing, no music, no crowd, but there was cornbread and butter, beans slow-cooked in iron, a small table set for 3, and laughter that came easy, not forced. Maisie sang a made-up song about a goat and a crooked fence. Nora laughed into Caleb's shoulder, her hand resting over his. The house felt full, even in its silence. That night, Caleb carried her over the threshold, not because she asked, but because she smiled when he offered. Later, in the hush between the last embers and dawn, Nora's voice broke the quiet. "We're home, aren't we?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "Yeah," he said. "We are." The first frost came sudden, curling silver over the oat rows before the sun had even climbed above the ridge. Nora stood at the edge of the field, wrapped in her wool shawl, her breath drifting in thin clouds. She touched a bowed stalk with her fingertips, the leaves crisp with cold. Some of the crop might make it, some wouldn't. But she wasn't afraid of loss anymore. Caleb was by the shed, splitting kindling, his sleeves rolled up, his axe biting clean into the wood. Sweat darkened the collar of his flannel, even in the cold. When he noticed her watching, he gave a short wave and smiled, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. She lifted a hand to her brow, shielding her eyes from the glare. "It's early," she said as she approached. "Too early," he agreed, wiping the blade on a rag. "We'll cover what we can tonight. Might lose the far row." She nodded. "I'll start soaking the beans. We'll want the stew thick." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, the gesture so natural now it hardly needed thought. "I'll come in when this is stacked." Inside the house, Maisie sat at the kitchen table tracing letters on a chalkboard. Her handwriting had improved, though the R in rooster still leaned like it might tip over. Nora moved around her with easy rhythm, measuring flour with a broken-handled spoon, humming a hymn her mother used to sing under her breath when no one was listening. When Caleb came in with a basket full of windfall apples, battered but usable, he set them down near the stove and crouched beside Maisie. "Which one's that?" he asked, pointing at a crooked letter. "That's R," she said proudly, "for ranch and rabbit." He grinned. And Rooster. Maisie giggled, nodding. Especially Rooster. The house felt lived in, not just occupied, but claimed. Every corner held something useful, something worn in. The windows breathed with the wind, and the shelves bore jars of pickled beets and late summer peaches. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it enough. That afternoon, Nora found an old ledger tucked behind the cupboard, likely Caleb's father's. It was filled with tidy numbers and uneven sketches of cattle brands, along with a few short notes about market prices and rainfall. She brought it out to the porch where Caleb was mending a saddle strap. "This still matter?" she asked, holding it up. He looked at the book for a long moment, then shook his head. "Not anymore." She sat beside him, thumbing the pages. "It's part of what came before you. So are a lot of things I've chosen to let go." "I don't want to erase your people, Caleb," she said. "I just want to know what parts are worth carrying forward." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "My father never said what he wanted us to do with this place. He just worked it." "And you?" "I want it to feel lived in, full of laughter, full of boots stomping across the floor. I want it to feel like now." She nodded slowly. "I'd like to plant flax next spring, try spinning our own thread, maybe even linen if the soil takes to it." He looked over, one eyebrow raised. "You think this land can grow thread?" "Only one way to find out." That night, they sat near the stove while the wind moaned softly outside. Maisie was curled up on the rug with her stuffed cat and a blanket stitched from feed sacks. Nora rocked in the chair, her knitting needles clacking gently as she worked on a pair of mittens. Caleb added another log to the fire. The flames caught fast, painting the room in gold and shadow. "You ever think about what comes after this?" he asked, settling on the floor beside her. She didn't answer right away. "I think about spring. What to name the calf when it comes." "Whether we'll have enough oats to barter with the Murphys for coffee." He smiled. "I meant further out." She looked at him fully, then, "I want to grow old with you here, with the sound of Maisie's boots running across the floor, with soap drying on the windowsill and smoke in the chimney and hands that know what they're reaching for." He reached out, took her hand. It was rough from work, warm from wool, and it settled over his like a promise. "Then that's what we'll do." Years passed in soft rhythm. The flax took to the southern plot, and Nora spun thread on a wheel Caleb built from salvage pine. They added a room to the house with a window facing east, and every morning Nora opened it to let the sun in. Maisie grew taller, her drawings turned into letters, and her letters into stories. She wrote about goats and girls with brave hearts and roosters that saved the day. Caleb planted a willow near the porch. By the time its branches brushed the rail, his beard had gone silver at the edges. Nora's braid was streaked with grey, but her hands still moved with grace. She still hummed when she cooked, still laughed at Maisie's nonsense, still leaned into Caleb's shoulder when the wind picked up and the night was long. They didn't leave the land. They didn't need to. Everything they had built right there, from grief and dirt and quiet mornings, from stitched hems and sharpened tools and 3 bowls at the table, from beginnings no one expected, and love that didn't ask for show. And in every season that passed, in every silence that came, they chose each other again, not because they had to, but because they knew what it meant to stay,